The music inside the grand hall was loud, but Elena Voss could barely hear it over the sound of her own heartbeat. Two men in dark suits stood only a few steps away, watching her with cold, patient eyes. She knew exactly why they were there. Her father had died 3 weeks ago, and with him, he had left behind a debt so large that Elena still could not say the number out loud without her hands shaking. She had come to this charity gala only to work, not to be found. As an event planner, she was supposed to blend into the background, checking flowers and place cards, making sure the wealthy guests never noticed the small problems behind the scenes. But somehow, in the middle of hundreds of people, the two men had found her anyway. "Miss Voss," the taller one said, his voice calm in a way that made it worse. "Your father made a promise. Now that promise belongs to you." Elena took a step back, bumping into a table covered in white silk. Glasses rattled. She looked around for security, but the guards near the entrance were too far away, too busy checking invitations to notice a quiet threat happening near the dessert table. "I need more time," she said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Please, I can pay. I just need more time." The shorter man smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Time is not something we offer for free. Her mind raced through every option, and there were none. She could not call the police, not when she did not even know exactly who these men worked for. She could not run, not without leading them straight to her younger brother, Leo, who was waiting for her at home, trusting that his older sister could fix everything the way she always tried to. That was when she saw him. A tall man stood near the bar, alone, wearing a black suit that fit him too well to be anything but expensive. He was not smiling like the other guests. He was not laughing at some joke or raising a glass in a toast. He simply stood there, watching the room the way a person watches water, before deciding whether it is safe to swim in. Elena did not know his name. She did not know anything about him, but in that single moment, with two dangerous men closing in on her, she made a decision that would change the rest of her life. She crossed the floor quickly, her heels clicking against the marble, and reached him just as the two men began to follow. Without thinking, without asking permission, she slipped her arm through his and leaned close, as if they had known each other for years. "Please," she whispered, so only he could hear. "Pretend to be my husband. Just for a few minutes. I will explain everything. I promise. Please." The man looked down at her, and for a second, his expression did not change at all. Elena's heart sank, certain she had just made the worst mistake of her life, grabbing a stranger who might call security on her, or worse, simply walk away and leave her exposed. Instead, he turned toward the two men who were now only a few steps away, and his entire posture shifted. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Is there a problem?" he asked. The taller man's confident expression disappeared instantly. His eyes widened, just slightly, in a way that told Elena this stranger was not simply another wealthy guest at a party. The two men exchanged a quick glance, and then, without another word, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd as if they had never been there at all. Elena stood frozen, still holding onto his arm, unsure if she should feel relieved or more afraid than before. "Thank you," she said quietly, finally releasing him and stepping back. "I am so sorry. I should not have done that. I just did not know what else to do." "Sit down," the man said, nodding toward a quiet table near the corner of the room, away from the crowd. It was not a request. Elena hesitated, glancing toward the exit, wondering if she should simply thank him again and disappear into the night. But something about the way the two men had reacted to him made her curious and a little afraid, and she found herself following him to the table anyway. Once they sat down, he studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Do you know who those men work for?" "No," Elena admitted. "My father borrowed money before he passed away. I only found out after he was gone. I have been trying to pay it back, but it is more than I can manage." "Your father is Anton Voss," the man said. It was not a question. Elena's stomach turned. "You knew him?" I know of him, the man said carefully, and I know the people he borrowed from. They are not the kind of people who forget a debt, Miss Voss. Hearing her own name from a stranger she had never met sent a chill down her spine. How do you know my name? Because everyone in this room knows exactly who is standing near them, he said, a faint, humorless smile crossing his face. You do not. Who are you? Damien Cross. The name meant nothing to Elena at first, but the moment he said it, she noticed something odd. A waiter nearby froze for half a second, before continuing his path around the room. A group of men near the entrance lowered their voices. Even the two men who had threatened her earlier were now standing far across the hall, refusing to look in this direction at all. You are the reason they left, Elena said slowly, understanding dawning on her. They are afraid of you. They should be, Damien said simply. Elena felt a strange mixture of fear and relief settle over her. She had heard whispers about a man named Cross before, mentioned quietly among people who worked in the city's wealthier circles, always followed by a change of subject. She had never imagined she would end up sitting across from him, drinking sparkling water from a glass with shaking hands. I should go, she said, standing quickly. Thank you again. I will find a way to solve this on my own. Sit down, Miss Voss. Something about his voice made her obey without thinking. She sank back into her chair, watching him carefully. You have a problem, Damien said, and as it happens, I have one as well. What kind of problem could someone like you possibly have? The Kozlov family, he said, and Elena noticed his jaw tighten slightly at the name. They believe that a man without a wife, without a family to protect, is a man with nothing to lose. They think that makes me unpredictable, dangerous in ways that are bad for business. They have been pushing me to settle down, to prove that I have something worth keeping steady for. Elena stared at him, slowly realizing where this conversation was heading. You want a fake wife. I want a solution, Damien corrected. And you need one as well. Your debt would disappear. Your name would carry protection that no one in this city would dare to challenge. In exchange, you would attend certain events with me, play a convincing role, and ask no questions about the parts of my life that do not concern you. That is insane, Elena said, though even as she spoke, she found herself thinking of Leo, of the hospital bills that never seemed to stop, of the fear that had followed her every single day since her father's funeral. It is practical, Damien said. I am not asking you to fall in love with me, Miss Voss. I am asking you to sign a contract. For how long? 6 months, perhaps a year, long enough to convince the people who need convincing. Elena's mind raced. Everything about this felt wrong, felt dangerous, felt like stepping willingly into a world she knew nothing about. And yet, when she thought about the alternative, about the two men who had cornered her only minutes ago, about the debt that grew heavier every single day, the offer began to look less like danger and more like the only door still open to her. I have a brother, she said finally. Leo. He is 16. If I do this, he needs to be safe, completely safe. He will be, Damien said, and something in his voice told her he meant it. And if I say no, then I wish you luck with the Kozlov family's collectors, Damien said, his tone unreadable. They rarely offer second chances. Elena looked down at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. She thought of her father's tired eyes in his final months, of the secrets he had kept from her, of the empty bakery that used to smell like warm bread and now smelled only of smoke and ash after the fire that had taken it from her. She thought of Leo, waiting at home, believing his sister could handle anything. All right, she said quietly. I will do it. Something shifted in Damien's expression, though it was gone before she could name it. He reached into his jacket and placed a plain white card on the table between them. Nothing printed on it except a phone number. Come to this address tomorrow morning, he said, standing and buttoning his jacket. We will discuss the details then. Wait, Elena said, standing as well. How do I know I can trust you? Damien paused, studying her for a long moment, as if deciding how honest to be. "You do not," he said finally. "But you already knew that when you grabbed my arm and called me your husband in front of two men who could have hurt you. Trust is not something you gave me tonight, Miss Voss. Necessity did." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd the same way he had appeared, leaving Elena standing alone at the table with a card in her hand and a decision already made that she could not take back. That night, Elena barely slept. She lay awake staring at the ceiling of her small apartment, listening to Leo's quiet breathing in the next room, wondering what kind of life she was about to walk into. She thought about calling the number on the card and pretending none of it had happened. She thought about running, about taking Leo somewhere far away where no one had ever heard the name Voss or Cross or Kozlov. But when morning came, she found herself standing outside a tall iron gate, staring up at an enormous stone house surrounded by trees, her hands trembling as she pressed the small button beside the entrance. A voice crackled through the speaker almost instantly, as if someone had been expecting her arrival down to the minute. "Miss Voss." "Yes," she said, straightening her shoulders, trying to look braver than she felt. The gate opened slowly, and Elena stepped through it, unaware that the moment her feet touched the stone path leading to the house, her old life had already ended, and a far more complicated one had just begun. Inside, the house was quiet in a way that felt heavy, every hallway polished and still, as if the building itself had learned to keep secrets. A man met her at the door, older than Damien, with sharp eyes that studied her the way a person studies a puzzle piece that does not quite fit. "I am Nico," he said, his tone polite but guarded. "Mr. Cross is waiting for you." He led her through the house to a large study, where Damien sat behind a heavy wooden desk, a folder open in front of him. He looked up when she entered, his expression as unreadable as it had been the night before. "You came," he said, sounding almost surprised. "I did not have many other choices," Elena said, taking the seat across from him. Damien slid the folder toward her. Inside was a document, several pages long, filled with terms and conditions, written in careful, precise language. She scanned it quickly, her eyes catching on phrases like temporary arrangement, mutual protection, and confidentiality required at all times. "Your father's debt will be paid in full by the end of the week," Damien said. "Your brother's tuition and medical expenses will be covered for as long as our arrangement continues. In exchange, you will live here, attend events as my wife when required, and maintain the appearance of a genuine marriage in public. And in private? In private, you will have your own space," he said. "I do not expect anything from you that is not written in that contract." Elena studied him carefully, searching his face for some sign of deception, some hint that this was not what it appeared to be. But all she found was a quiet, controlled patience, the kind of calm that came from a man who had made difficult decisions many times before and never once let them show on his face. "What happens to Leo?" she asked. "If people find out this is not real, will he be in danger?" "No one will find out," Damien said. "Not from me, and not from anyone in this house. My people do not talk, Miss Voss. That is the first thing you should understand about the world you are stepping into." Elena picked up the pen resting beside the folder, her hand hovering over the signature line. She thought of the two men at the gala, of the ash that still clung to the walls of her father's bakery, of Leo's hopeful face every time he asked if things were going to be all right. She signed her name. Damien watched her set the pen down, and for the first time since she had met him, something close to relief passed briefly across his features before disappearing behind his usual calm expression. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Cross," he said quietly. Elena felt the weight of the words settle over her like a heavy coat, unfamiliar and strange, but somehow, beneath the fear and uncertainty, she also felt something she had not felt in weeks. For the first time since her father's death, she felt the faint, fragile beginning of safety. She did not yet know that the man across from her carried more secrets than she could imagine, secrets that were tied not only to his own dangerous world, but to the very debt that had brought her to his door. She did not know that the fire that destroyed her father's bakery had not been an accident, or that the name Kozlov would soon mean far more to her than a simple threat at a party. All she knew, as she rose from her chair and shook the hand of the man who was now, on paper at least, her husband, was that she had just made a bargain with a stranger the entire city seemed to fear, and there was no way to undo it now. Outside the study window, the morning light stretched long shadows across the garden, and somewhere beyond the iron gates, two men reported back to their employer that the Voss woman had disappeared into the protection of Damien Cross. The news would not stay quiet for long. By nightfall, every family that mattered in the city would know that Damien Cross had taken a wife, and every one of them would begin asking the same dangerous question. Why now? Elena's new bedroom was larger than her entire old apartment. Tall windows looked out over a garden lined with stone paths, and a private bathroom held more space than the kitchen she had grown up cooking in beside her father. She stood in the middle of the room that first night, holding the single suitcase she had brought with her, feeling like a guest who had wandered into someone else's life by mistake. A soft knock came at the door. When she opened it, a young woman with kind eyes and a warm smile stood on the other side, holding a stack of folded towels. "You must be Mrs. Cross," the woman said. "I am Grace. I help run the house. If you need anything, you only need to ask." "Thank you, Grace," Elena said, still not used to hearing her new name. "Is it always this quiet here?" Grace's smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Cross prefers quiet. It is safer that way." The word safer stayed with Elena long after Grace left. She unpacked slowly, placing her few belongings into a closet far too large for them, and tried to settle into the strange, silent rhythm of the house. Dinner that night was a formal affair, the two of them seated at opposite ends of a long table, a staff member quietly serving courses neither of them seemed to enjoy. "You do not have to sit so far away," Elena said finally, breaking the silence. "It feels ridiculous, shouting across a table just to ask for the salt." Damien looked up, surprised, as if no one had ever pointed that out to him before. Without a word, he rose and moved to the seat closer to hers, setting his plate down with quiet precision. "Better?" he asked. "Much," Elena said, allowing herself a small smile. Over the following days, a routine began to form between them, awkward at first, built on careful boundaries and unspoken rules. Lena learned quickly that there were certain doors in the house she was not permitted to open, certain conversations that ended the moment she asked too many questions, and certain visitors who arrived late at night and left before morning, their faces never fully seen. She also learned that Damien Cross was not entirely the man his reputation suggested. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, kneeling beside a row of small plants, his sleeves rolled up, dirt on his hands. It was such an unexpected sight that she stopped walking and simply stared. "You garden?" she asked. "My mother did," Damien said, not looking up. "I keep it going. It is one of the only things in this house that does not require negotiation or fear to survive." Elena knelt down beside him, careful not to ruin her clothes. "What happened to her?" Damien's hands paused for a moment before continuing their careful work. "She died a long time ago, before I understood what my father's business truly meant." "I am sorry," Elena said quietly. "Do not be," he said. "It taught me things I needed to learn early." It was the most personal thing he had shared with her since the night of the gala, and Elena found herself wanting to know more, wanting to understand the man behind the calm, controlled exterior that the rest of the city seemed to fear so deeply. But before she could ask another question, his phone rang, and his expression shifted instantly back into the guarded, distant mask she had grown used to seeing. "I have to take this," he said, standing and brushing the dirt from his hands. "Excuse me." He walked away without another word, and Elena remained kneeling in the garden, watching him go, aware of just how quickly he could disappear behind invisible walls whenever the outside world came calling. Later that week, Elena discovered another surprising truth about her arrangement. She had mentioned, only in passing during dinner, that Leo had a doctor's appointment coming up that she was worried about affording, even with the arrangement in place. 2 days later, she received a message from the hospital confirming that the entire bill, including a specialist consultation she had not even requested yet, had already been paid in full. She found Damien in his study that evening, the folder from their first meeting still sitting on the corner of his desk. "You paid for Leo's appointment," she said. "I did not ask you to do that." "You mentioned it," Damien said, not looking up from the documents in front of him. "I handled it. That was not part of the contract." "The contract said your brother would be taken care of," Damien said simply. "I am taking care of him." Elena stood in the doorway, unsure how to respond. She had expected a business arrangement, cold and transactional, exactly as it had been described. She had not expected quiet gestures of care that seemed to come without any expectation of thanks or recognition. "Thank you," she said finally. Damien looked up at her then, and for a brief moment, something softened in his expression, something that looked almost like the version of himself she had seen kneeling in the garden. "You are welcome, Elena." It was the first time he had used her first name instead of Miss Voss or Mrs. Cross, and the sound of it in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, one she quickly tried to ignore. Not everyone in the house watched their growing familiarity with the same quiet approval as Grace. Nico, in particular, seemed to grow more tense each time he saw them together, his eyes following Elena with a careful, calculating watchfulness that made her uneasy. One evening, as she passed through the hallway near the study, Nico stepped out and blocked her path, his expression serious. "A word, Mrs. Cross," he said. "Of course," Elena replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have worked for this family a long time," Nico said. "I watched Damien grow up in a world that does not forgive weakness. He has never let anyone close, not truly, not since his mother passed. What you are doing here, this arrangement, it is dangerous for reasons you do not fully understand yet." "I know it is dangerous," Elena said. "That is why I agreed to it." "That is not what I mean," Nico said, his voice dropping lower. "I mean it is dangerous for him. If he begins to see this as more than a contract, it will make him vulnerable in ways his enemies will not hesitate to use against him. And if you begin to see it as more than a contract as well, you will only get hurt when it ends." Elena's cheeks flushed, though she was not entirely sure if it was from embarrassment or something closer to guilt, as if Nico had noticed something in her that she had not yet fully admitted to herself. "This is a business arrangement," she said firmly. "Nothing more." "See that it stays that way," Nico said, before turning and walking down the hallway, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and a growing unease that had nothing to do with the Kozlov family or the debt her father had left behind. That unease only deepened a few nights later, when Elena could not sleep and made her way quietly down to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she passed the study, she noticed the door slightly open, a light still on inside. She should have kept walking. Instead, she paused, drawn by the sound of Damien's low, tense voice. "The Voss debt was never about money," he was saying, his voice carrying a sharp edge she had not heard from him before. "You know that as well as I do. Anton Voss was involved in something he should never have touched, and now his daughter is caught in the middle of it because of choices that were never hers to make." Elena froze in the hallway, her heart pounding. She could not make out who he was speaking to, but the words settled into her chest like ice water. Her father's debt was never about money. There was something more, something hidden beneath the surface of the story she had been told, and Damien clearly knew far more about it than he had ever shared with her. She waited until the study fell silent again, before slipping back to her room, her mind racing through everything she thought she understood about her father's final months. He had always seemed tired, distracted, glancing over his shoulder in ways she had dismissed as simple stress from running a small business. Now she wondered if there had been far more behind those tired eyes than she had ever realized. The next morning, she found the courage to ask Damien directly, catching him alone in the study before the rest of the house had fully woken. "I heard you last night," she said. "You said my father's debt was never about money. What did you mean?" Damien's expression tightened, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. "It is not something I can discuss yet." "He was my father," Elena said, her voice rising slightly. "I deserve to know what happened to him." "You deserve the truth," Damien agreed. "But the truth right now would put you in more danger than you are already in, and I am not willing to risk that until I am certain you can be protected from what it means." "That is not your decision to make." "It is, as long as you are living under my protection," Damien said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Trust me a little longer, Elena. When the time is right, I will tell you everything." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers immediately, but something in his eyes, a flicker of genuine concern beneath the careful control, made her pause. Whatever he was hiding, it did not feel like a lie meant to protect himself. It felt like a burden he was carrying alone, one he did not yet trust her enough to share. "Fine," she said finally, "but I will not wait forever." "I know," Damien said quietly, watching her leave the room with an expression she could not quite read, somewhere between guilt and quiet admiration for a woman who refused to simply accept silence. Over the following weeks, their strange arrangement continued to evolve in ways neither of them had anticipated. They attended a handful of small events together, Elena playing the role of devoted wife with growing confidence, and Damien, in turn, treating her with a kind of careful respect that made the performance feel less like a lie each time. Guests at these events began to comment on how natural they seemed together, how easily Damien smiled when Elena spoke, a sight several of them claimed they had never witnessed before. Elena found herself looking forward to these small, quiet interactions more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was simply because the arrangement was working, because her debt was being paid and her brother was safe, because the fear that had followed her every day since her father's death had finally begun to loosen its grip. But late at night, lying awake in her large, unfamiliar bedroom, she knew it was more complicated than that. She thought of Damien kneeling in the garden with dirt on his hands. She thought of the quiet way he had paid for Leo's appointment without asking for thanks. She thought of the flicker of guilt in his eyes when he refused to explain her father's secret, and the way he had called her by her first name for the very first time. She did not yet understand the full danger of what she was beginning to feel, or how closely tied it was to the very secrets Damien was still keeping from her. She did not know that somewhere across the city, the Kozlov family had already begun watching their growing closeness with sharp, calculating interest, waiting for the right moment to test just how real this marriage truly was. All Elena knew, as she finally drifted off to sleep that night, was that the contract she had signed out of desperation was beginning to feel less like a business arrangement and more like something far more complicated and far more dangerous than she had ever intended it to become. The invitation arrived on a Friday afternoon, delivered by a private courier who waited silently at the door until Grace signed for it. Elena watched from the top of the staircase as Damien opened the cream-colored envelope, his expression darkening the moment he read the name printed at the bottom of the card. "Kozlov," he said quietly, almost to himself. Elena came down the stairs slowly. "What does it say?" "A dinner invitation," Damien said, handing her the card. "Viktor Kozlov wants to meet my wife." The words on the card were polite, even warm, expressing a wish to welcome the newest addition to the city's most respected families. But Elena had learned enough in the past few weeks to understand that politeness in this world often hid something far sharper underneath. "Is it safe to go?" she asked. "It is not safe to refuse," Damien said. "If we decline, it will look like we have something to hide. If we accept, we walk into a room full of people who will be watching every word, every glance, every gesture between us, searching for any sign that this marriage is not real." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "And if they find that sign, then everything falls apart," Damien said simply. "Your protection, your brother's safety, all of it depends on how convincing we are in that room." The days leading up to the dinner passed in careful preparation. Damien walked her through the names and faces of the people she would meet, explaining old rivalries and fragile alliances she needed to understand before stepping into that world. Elena listened carefully, memorizing details the way she once memorized seating charts and menu preferences for her clients, though the stakes here felt far higher than any wedding or gala she had ever planned. On the night of the dinner, Elena stood in front of her mirror, smoothing the deep green dress Grace had helped her choose, her hands trembling slightly despite weeks of preparation. Damien knocked softly before entering, stopping in the doorway when he saw her. "You look like you belong in that room," he said quietly. "I do not feel like I belong anywhere near that room," Elena admitted. "You will," Damien said, offering his arm. "Just remember, whatever happens tonight, stay close to me." The Kozlov estate was even larger than Damien's, filled with sharp-eyed guests, dressed in expensive clothing, their conversations quiet but constant, like the low hum of insects in a summer field. Viktor Kozlov greeted them at the entrance himself, a tall man with silver hair and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "Mr. Cross," Viktor said, shaking Damien's hand firmly. "And this must be the wife everyone has been talking about." "Elena," she said, offering her hand. "Charming," Viktor said, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. "I did not think Damien had it in him to fall for someone so quickly. He has always been careful about who he lets close." "Some things are worth being careful for," Damien said smoothly, placing a protective hand at the small of Elena's back as they moved into the main hall. Throughout dinner, Elena felt the weight of dozens of curious eyes upon her, each guest studying the way she and Damien interacted, searching for cracks in the story. She laughed at the right moments, reached for Damien's hand when the conversation grew tense, and allowed herself to lean slightly toward him whenever silence threatened to stretch too long between them. It felt, in strange and unsettling ways, less like acting than she had expected. The real test came later in the evening, when a woman named Irina, elegant and sharp-tongued, approached Damien near the drink table while Elena was momentarily separated, caught in polite conversation with an older Kozlov relative. From across the room, Elena watched as Irina leaned close to Damien, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her laughter carrying easily over the quiet music. Elena excused herself from her conversation as quickly as politeness allowed, crossing the room with measured steps, though something hot and uncomfortable had begun twisting in her chest, something she refused to name. "There you are," she said, slipping her arm through Damien's, her voice sweet but firm. "I was starting to miss you." Irina's smile flickered, though she recovered quickly. "Damien was just telling me how the two of you met. Quite the romantic story." "It was unexpected," Elena said, meeting Damien's eyes, "but I would not change a single moment of it." Damien's hand tightened gently around hers, and for the first time all evening, the smile he gave her did not feel like part of the performance at all. Later, near the edge of the room, Elena found herself caught in a different kind of tension when a Kozlov lieutenant named Adrian, tall and unsettlingly confident, engaged her in conversation that quickly grew too personal for comfort. He complimented her dress, then her intelligence, then leaned in close enough that Elena instinctively stepped back. "You seem far too interesting for a man like Cross," Adrian said, his voice low. "He keeps everything locked away. I wonder if he even knows how to appreciate someone like you." "I think you have had a little too much wine," Elena said, forcing a polite smile while searching the room for Damien. Before Adrian could respond, Damien appeared beside her, his expression calm, but his eyes carrying a warning sharp enough to make even Adrian take a small step back. "Adrian," Damien said evenly, "I believe my wife was just about to get some air." "Of course," Adrian said, raising his hands slightly in mock surrender before melting back into the crowd. Once they stepped out onto the quiet balcony, overlooking the estate's dark garden, Elena finally let out a breath she felt like she had been holding all evening. That was intense, she admitted. You handled it well, Damien said, standing close beside her, his voice softer now that they were away from watching eyes. Did I? Because for a moment back there, watching that woman touch your arm, I did not feel like I was acting at all. The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and she immediately wished she could take them back. Damien turned to look at her, something unreadable passing behind his eyes. Neither did I, he said quietly, watching Adrian look at you the way he did. I did not like it. The night air felt suddenly charged between them, the noise of the dinner party fading into the background. Elena's heart pounded as Damien reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face, his fingers lingering longer than necessary. Elena, he said softly. Yes? This was supposed to be simple, he murmured, more to himself than to her. A contract, nothing more. I know, she whispered. Neither of them moved away. Tell me to stop, Damien said, his voice low, his eyes searching hers. Elena did not tell him to stop. The kiss that followed was nothing like the careful, calculated performance they had practiced in the days leading up to the dinner. It was real, warm, and far too honest for either of them to pretend otherwise once it ended, leaving them both standing on the balcony in stunned silence, the boundaries of their contract quietly, irrevocably crossed. They did not speak of it on the drive home. Elena stared out the window at the passing city lights, her mind replaying the moment over and over, unsure whether to feel excited or terrified by what it might mean. Damien remained equally silent, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel with more focus than the empty road required. By the time they reached the estate, an unspoken agreement seemed to settle between them, a decision to retreat back into careful professionalism, to pretend the balcony had never happened at all. Elena said a quiet goodnight and disappeared up the stairs, while Damien remained in the study long after the house had gone dark, staring at nothing in particular, wrestling with feelings he had never planned to allow himself to have. 2 days later, unable to focus on much else, Elena found herself wandering into the small library on the estate's second floor, searching for something to distract her restless mind. It was there, tucked behind a row of old books, that she noticed a loose section of the wooden shelf, slightly out of place. Curious, she pulled it forward and discovered a hidden drawer, and inside it, a worn leather ledger with her father's handwriting covering nearly every page. Her hands shook as she opened it, scanning the columns of numbers and names, her father's careful notes detailing transactions she did not understand at first. But as she read further, a terrible clarity began to form. Her father had not simply borrowed money from dangerous people, he had been moving money for them, quietly funneling funds through the bakery's accounts for the Kozlov family, likely without fully understanding the danger of the arrangement he had entered. Elena sat frozen on the library floor, the ledger open in her lap, realizing that the fire that destroyed her father's bakery may not have been the accident everyone believed it to be. And if that was true, then the debt she had inherited, the danger that had followed her to the gala that night, and the strange, careful protection Damien had wrapped around her ever since, were all connected to something far larger and far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. She thought of Damien's words the night she overheard him in the study. The Voss debt was never about money. Now, sitting alone with her father's secrets spread across her lap, Elena finally understood just how right he had been, and just how much he still had not told her. Elena found Damien in the study late that night, the ledger clutched tightly in her hands. He looked up from his desk, and the moment he saw her expression, he seemed to know exactly what she had discovered. "Where did you find that?" he asked quietly, setting down his pen. "Behind a shelf in the library," Elena said, stepping forward and placing the ledger firmly on the desk between them. "My father was laundering money for the Kozlov family. That is what this debt was really about, is it not? Not a simple loan. He was part of something much bigger." Damien did not deny it. "Yes. And you knew," Elena said, her voice rising. "You knew from the very beginning, and you let me believe this was only about money." "I was protecting you," Damien said, standing and moving around the desk toward her. The less you knew, the safer you were. Protecting me or controlling me? Elena demanded. Was this entire marriage ever really about the Kozlov family testing your reputation, or was it about keeping me close enough to make sure I never found out what my father was involved in? It was never that simple, Damien said, his voice tight with something that looked almost like pain. Your father was working with the Kozlov family long before you ever met me, moving money through his business without fully understanding how deep he had gotten. When he tried to walk away, they made it clear that walking away was not an option. The fire that destroyed his bakery was not an accident, Elena. It was a warning, one he did not survive to fully understand. Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her, the truth she had feared finally spoken aloud. He was murdered. Yes, Damien said quietly. And you knew this the entire time, she said, tears burning in her eyes. Every single day, while I sat across from you at dinner, while I let myself believe that something real was growing between us, you knew exactly what happened to my father and said nothing. I was trying to find proof, Damien said. Proof strong enough to bring down the people responsible without putting you directly in their path. The moment I revealed what I knew, you would have become an even greater target than you already were. That was not your choice to make for me, Elena said, backing away from him. I trusted you. I actually started to believe that this arrangement had become something more than a contract, and this entire time, you were using me as a piece in a game I did not even know I was playing. That is not fair, Damien said, his composure finally cracking. Everything I have done since the night of the gala has been to protect you, Elena. The money for your brother, the quiet handling of your father's debt, even this marriage itself, none of it was calculated the way you think it was. Then what about Nico? Elena asked suddenly, remembering the warning he had given her weeks earlier. He told me to be careful, that letting you get close made you vulnerable. Did he know about this too? Damien's expression darkened in a way Elena had never seen before. Nico has been asking too many questions lately about matters that should not concern him. Before either of them could continue the conversation, a sharp knock interrupted them, and one of Damien's men entered quickly, his face pale. Sir, we have a problem, the man said. The security feed near the east gate went dark 10 minutes ago, and Nico is nowhere to be found. Damien's entire posture shifted instantly, the tension between him and Elena momentarily forgotten as something far more dangerous took its place. Check every camera in the house. Now. The man disappeared quickly, and Damien turned back to Elena, his expression grim. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. What is happening? Elena asked, fear beginning to replace her anger. I think Nico has been talking to the Kozlov family, Damien said. For how long, I do not know. But if the East Gate camera went dark right as I am telling you the truth about your father, that is not a coincidence. Before Damien could leave the study, the lights in the house flickered once, then went dark completely, plunging the room into sudden shadow. Elena's heart pounded as she heard distant shouting from somewhere deeper in the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of a struggle. Stay behind me, Damien said sharply, pulling her close as he moved toward the study door. They found chaos in the hallway. Two of Damien's men lay unconscious near the staircase, and at the far end of the corridor, Nico stood beside three unfamiliar men, his expression a mixture of guilt and resolve. Nico, Damien said, his voice dangerously quiet. Tell me this is not what it looks like. I am sorry, Damien, Nico said, and for the first time, Elena heard real regret in his voice. The Kozlov family has been paying me for information for over a year. I never meant for it to go this far, but once you started, there was no way out that did not end badly for me. You could have come to me, Damien said. Whatever they had on you, we could have handled it. Victor does not offer second chances, Nico said, and he wants her. He nodded toward Elena. He believes that with her gone, you will be too distracted to protect what matters, and the rest of your organization will fall apart around you. Before Damien could respond, one of the unfamiliar men lunged forward, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her sharply away from Damien's side. She cried out, struggling against the tight grip, watching in horror as Damien moved to stop them, only to be blocked by the two remaining men. "Let her go!" Damien shouted, fighting to reach her. But the numbers were against him, and within seconds, Elena felt herself being dragged toward the darkened staircase, her protest swallowed by the chaos of the struggling men around her. "I am sorry," Nico called out as they disappeared into the shadows with Elena, his voice heavy with regret he could not undo. This was never supposed to happen this way. Damien finally broke free from the men blocking him, but by the time he reached the staircase, the hallway beyond was empty, the sound of a car engine already fading into the distance outside. He stood frozen for only a moment, his chest heaving, before something cold and determined settled over his features, replacing the fear with a focus Elena had never witnessed before. He turned to the men who remained loyal, his voice sharp and commanding. "Get every available person moving. Now, I want to know where Viktor Kozlov is holding her within the hour, and I do not care what it takes to find out." As his men scattered to follow his orders, Damien stood alone in the darkened hallway for a brief moment, the weight of everything he had kept hidden finally crashing down around him. He thought of Elena's face in the study only minutes earlier, filled with hurt and betrayal, and he realized with sudden clarity that whatever this arrangement had started as, it had long since become something far more important than a contract or a convenient cover story. He had let his guard down exactly the way Nico had warned Elena it would happen, and now the woman he could no longer pretend not to care for was in the hands of the one family in this city who would not hesitate to use her as a weapon against him. Damien grabbed his coat from the study and moved toward the door with the calm, deadly focus of a man who had nothing left to lose. Because somewhere across the city, in a house he knew all too well, Elena Voss was waiting for him to prove that everything he had told her about protecting her had never been a lie at all. Elena woke slowly, her head aching, the unfamiliar ceiling above her taking a moment to come into focus. She was lying on a couch in a large, dimly lit room, her wrists bound loosely in front of her with rope that had clearly been tied by someone in a hurry. She sat up carefully, her mind racing to catch up with everything that had happened. The room around her looked like a study, similar in style to Damien's, though the shelves here held far fewer books and far more locked cabinets. A single door stood across the room, slightly ajar, faint voices drifting through it from somewhere beyond. Elena worked quickly at the rope binding her wrists, grateful for whatever carelessness had led to such a loose knot. Years of tying ribbons and bows for countless events had given her fingers more skill than her captors likely realized, and within a few minutes, the rope fell away entirely. She moved cautiously toward the door, listening carefully to the voices beyond. She recognized Viktor Kozlov's calm, controlled tone immediately. "Once Cross arrives, he will not be thinking clearly," Viktor was saying to someone else in the room. "A man in love makes mistakes. A man protecting only himself would never make. We simply need to be patient." Elena's heart pounded at the confirmation that Damien was already on his way, though the knowledge brought as much fear as relief. She glanced around the room for anything she could use, spotting a heavy metal bookend resting on a nearby shelf. She was not interested in confronting anyone directly, not with her limited combat experience, but she needed options, and a locked window across the room caught her attention. Testing the latch quietly, she found it stiff but not impossible to force open. She worked at it slowly, careful to avoid making noise, until it finally gave way with a soft, barely audible click. Cool night air rushed into the room, and Elena allowed herself a small breath of relief. Before she could climb through, the study door swung open fully, and a guard stepped inside, his eyes widening as he spotted the open window and Elena standing beside it. "Hey!" he called out, moving quickly toward her. Elena grabbed the heavy bookend from the shelf without thinking, swinging it just enough to catch the guard's arm as he reached for her, causing him to stumble back with a surprised shout rather than any serious harm. She used the distraction to scramble toward the window, pulling herself through just as more footsteps thundered down the hallway behind her. She landed hard in a garden bed outside, scraping her palms against the dirt, but she did not stop moving. She ran along the side of the house, her mind focused entirely on finding a way out through the darkness, when the sound of an approaching car engine cut sharply through the night. Headlights swept across the garden, and for a terrifying moment, Elena froze, certain she had been found by more of Victor's men. But then the car door opened, and Damien's voice called out into the darkness, sharp with urgency. "Elena!" Relief flooded through her so quickly her knees nearly buckled. She ran toward him, and he caught her firmly, his hands checking quickly for any sign of injury, his expression a mixture of fury and overwhelming relief. "I am all right," she said quickly, though her voice trembled. "I got out. I got out on my own." "Of course you did," Damien said, something close to pride breaking through his worry, even in the middle of the danger surrounding them. Before they could move further, harsh floodlights suddenly illuminated the entire garden, and Viktor Kozlov's voice echoed calmly across the open space, several armed men fanning out around them. "That is impressive, Miss Voss," Viktor said, stepping forward with an unsettling calm. "Truly. But I am afraid your evening is not quite finished." Damien positioned himself protectively in front of Elena, his voice steady despite the danger surrounding them. "This ends now, Viktor. Whatever quarrel you have with me, it does not involve her." "It involves anyone you care about," Viktor said simply. "That has always been the point." Nico stepped forward from among Viktor's men then, his expression tight with a struggle Elena could clearly see written across his face. He hesitated, glancing between Damien and Viktor, before finally speaking. "This has gone too far," Nico said quietly. "I agreed to share information because Viktor threatened my sister's safety years ago, and I was too afraid to refuse him, but I never agreed to this. Taking an innocent woman, threatening to hurt people who have done nothing wrong, this is not what I signed on for." "You do not have a choice anymore," Viktor said coldly. "You made your decision the moment you took my money." "Maybe," Nico said, "but I can still make a different one now." In a swift motion, Nico turned and struck the guard standing nearest to him, creating just enough confusion for Damien to pull Elena further back toward the safety of the garden wall. Shouts erupted around them as Viktor's carefully controlled plan began to unravel, his men uncertain whether to stop Nico or maintain their positions around Damien and Elena. Using the chaos, Damien moved quickly, disarming the nearest guard with practiced efficiency before turning to face Viktor directly, no longer hiding behind calm negotiation. "Call them off, Viktor," Damien said. "This ends here, tonight, one way or another." Viktor studied the scene around him, his carefully built plan crumbling with each passing second as more of Damien's own people arrived, having followed him from the estate the moment word of Elena's location reached them. Surrounded and outnumbered, Viktor's confident expression finally faltered. "This is not over," Viktor said, though the words carried far less weight than they might have only minutes earlier. "It is for tonight," Damien said firmly. "And if you ever come near her again, it will be over permanently." Faced with the reality of his failed plan, Viktor lowered his hand slowly, signaling his remaining men to stand down. Elena watched, still catching her breath, as the tension in the garden slowly eased, replaced by the quiet, exhausted relief of danger finally past. Nico approached them cautiously afterward, his expression uncertain. "I know this does not erase what I did," he said to Damien, "but I hope it counts for something." "It does," Damien said, after a long moment. "We will talk about what happens next, but not tonight." The drive back to the estate was quiet, though it was a different kind of silence than the one that had followed their kiss on the Kozlov balcony days earlier. Elena sat close to Damien this time, her hand resting in his without hesitation, the fear and adrenaline of the night slowly giving way to something calmer and more certain. "You came for me," she said softly, breaking the silence. I will always come for you, Damien said, glancing at her briefly before returning his focus to the road. I should have told you the truth from the beginning, Elena. I am sorry it took something like tonight to make that clear. You were trying to protect me, Elena said. I understand that now. It does not mean it did not hurt, but I understand it. Once they arrived back at the estate, the house slowly returning to its usual calm despite the chaos of the night before, Damien led her not to the study, but out to the quiet garden where she had once found him, kneeling among his mother's flowers. The moon hung low over the trees, casting soft light across the paths. I need to ask you something, Damien said, turning to face her fully. And I need you to know that whatever you decide, your safety and your brother's safety will never depend on your answer. Elena's heart began to race. All right. When this all started, Damien said, you looked at me at that gala and asked me to pretend to be your husband. I said forever without thinking twice, because in that moment, it was simply the easiest way to make a threat disappear. But somewhere between then and now, saying that word stopped feeling like part of an act. Elena felt tears gather in her eyes, though this time they came from something far warmer than fear. It stopped feeling like an act for me too. I do not want a contract anymore, Elena, Damien said, reaching for her hands. I do not want 6 months, or a year, or an arrangement with an ending built into it. I am asking you now, without any threat forcing your answer, without any debt hanging over your head, will you stay? Not as a pretend wife, but as the woman I have somehow, against every rule I set for myself, fallen completely in love with. Elena laughed softly through her tears, the sound carrying the relief of weeks of fear and uncertainty, finally settling into something steady and real. Yes, she said. Forever. For real this time. Damien pulled her close, and this kiss carried none of the desperate uncertainty of the one on the Kozlov balcony. It was slow, certain, a promise neither of them needed a contract to keep. Months later, a small wedding took place in that same garden, surrounded by the people who had proven themselves loyal through every dangerous turn along the way. Leo stood proudly beside his sister, finally free from fear about tuition bills or hidden debts. Grace arranged flowers with quiet joy, and even Nico, given a second chance after months of proving his loyalty through quiet, careful work rebuilding the trust he had broken, stood near the back of the small gathering, watching with visible relief. Elena wore a simple white dress, far different from the elegant gowns she had worn to Kozlov dinners and charity galas, but it felt more like her than anything else she had worn during the strange, dangerous months that had brought her here. As she walked toward Damien beneath the soft evening light, she thought of that desperate whisper at the gala so many months ago, and the single word that had answered it. Forever. This time, standing across from the man she loved, surrounded by a found family built through hardship and honesty rather than fear and obligation, Elena finally understood that the word had never been a lie. It had simply been waiting, patiently, for both of them to become brave enough to mean it.